On the morning of February 2nd, 1922, Henry Peavy unlocked the front door of his employer, ready to start the workday. He was a valet and cook to one of the most well-liked and famous directors in Hollywood, William Desmond Taylor. As he entered the bungalow at 404 Alvarado Street, he saw his boss lying on the floor.
Peavy ran outside screaming over and over that Mr. Taylor was dead. Only his name wasn't really William Desmond Taylor. And he wasn't just dead, he was murdered. The 100-year-old cold case has never been solved. It exposed the dark underbelly of Los Angeles, shook Hollywood to its core, and changed the movies forever.
Hollywood in the 1920s was a wild place. Between 1910 and 1920, the population exploded by over 700%. The motion picture business, which had started in the east coast of the United States, had moved out west, where they were cranking out silent films at an incredible rate.
The stars of the day, like Charlie Chaplin, Fatty Arbuckle, Mabel Normand, Douglas Fairbanks, and Mary Pickford, were making and spending salaries regular folks could only dream of. Champagne and cocaine parties, as some labeled them, were all the rage. Heroin and morphine were also available if you knew the right people.
What about bootleg liquor?
Not a problem in Hollywood. And if something happened that could tarnish a star's reputation, well, the police department and the district attorney's office were being paid quite well by the film studios to keep things on the hush-hush.
Until things started happening that they couldn't cover up. In September of 1920, Olive Thomas, a 25-year-old actress, wife of known drug addict Jack Pickford, and sister-in-law of beloved Mary Pickford, died in Paris of an accidental poisoning, and it was splashed in the newspapers worldwide. And then in September of 1921, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, the #1 comedy star of the day, was arrested, accused of horribly causing the death of a woman at a wild party he threw in San Francisco.
Newspapers were concerned with sales, not truth.
And these stories sold the papers. In 1922, William Desmond Taylor was at the top of the heap. President of the Screen Directors Guild, he had directed 22 films by the time of his death, including classics like Tom Sawyer, Anne of Green Gables, and Huckleberry Finn. He worked with the top stars of the day and had done a popular series of films with Mary Miles Minter, the girl who was supposed to be the next Mary Pickford. He was a proper gentleman, cultured and educated. He had served in the British military in World War I, which only enhanced his reputation. His image was squeaky clean. No one knew just how many secrets he had been keeping.
After Henry Peavy ran from the bungalow on Alvarado Street, a crowd started to gather inside. A man who identified himself as a doctor looked at the body and announced Mr. Taylor had died of a stomach hemorrhage, and then the doctor disappeared. No one could identify him later when asked. The police were called to investigate a case of natural death. By the time they arrived, the bungalow was full of people. Film studio executives had already been inside cleaning up anything they could find that might be a problem. It is said they removed crates of bootleg liquor and burned papers in a fireplace. The newspapers reported Mabel Normand was there looking for letters she had written to Taylor, and that Henry Peavy, the valet, was in the kitchen washing dishes. Lingerie with the initials MMM was found in a bedroom. Mysterious keys and closets full of pornographic materials were also reported to be found, and Taylor was laying on the floor, his clothes perfectly in place, and nothing to indicate anything wrong at all, except for a small chair which had fallen over. A neighbor reported she had heard a car backfire on the night of February 1st, and had seen a man leave Taylor's home.
Eventually, Taylor's body was turned over, and a small pool of blood was found underneath. William Desmond Taylor had been murdered, shot in the back. The bullet holes in Taylor's jacket, vest, and shirt only lined up if he was standing with his left arm slightly raised. He had the equivalent of $1,200 in his pocket. He had also had a pocket watch, a penknife, silver cigarette case, and a locket with a photograph of Mabel Normand. He was wearing a 2-carat diamond ring, but a large amount of money he had shown an accountant a day or two earlier was reportedly missing and never found.
And all of William Desmond Taylor's secrets were about to come out. It turns out he wasn't William Desmond Taylor at all. He was born William Dean Tanner in Ireland in 1872. His father was a retired British Army officer. William moved to the United States in 1891 and eventually made his way to New York. He married Ethel May Hamilton in 1901, and they had daughter Ethel Daisy in 1902 or 1903. William worked for his father-in-law at a high-end antique store. He and his wife were well known and liked members of New York society. William was known to drink, possibly too much, and suffer from what friends called mental lapses. So when he disappeared in 1908, it was assumed one of these lapses was to blame. Ethel divorced William in 1912.
From 1908 to 1912, he supposedly spent time in Canada, Alaska, and the northwestern United States. By 1912, he had changed his name to William Desmond Taylor and was acting in San Francisco. From there, he went to Hollywood, where he acted in several early films before being promoted to director in 1914.
In 1915, Taylor was contacted by his younger brother's wife. The brother, Dennis, had abandoned his wife and family years earlier and possibly ended up in California working for Taylor for a while. Taylor agreed to pay his former sister-in-law $50 a month, as she had tuberculosis and her family was destitute.
In 1918, Taylor had a starring role in a popular film, Captain Alvarez. In a theater in New York, the wife and daughter he had abandoned in 1908 realized that Captain Alvarez was actually the man they knew as William Dean Tanner. They wrote to the studio, and Taylor went to New York to meet his daughter. There seems to have been no hard feelings, as Ethel Daisy Tanner wrote letters to her father, and he may have responded. But he did not make the secret life he had left behind known to those in his new life. His friends and associates knew nothing of his New York family.
Beautiful Mabel Normand had been the last person known to have seen Taylor before the murder. She had been at his home the evening before he died. Henry Peavy had served orange blossom cocktails before leaving for the night. Taylor walked Mabel out to her chauffeured car sometime between 7:45 and 8 p.m. She blew him a kiss as her car drove off.
Taylor may have been in love with Mabel, although she said they were just good pals. They had known each other a long time, and Taylor had tried to help her get off drugs, even going so far as arranging her to stay at a sanatorium to get off opium and cocaine. It was said that her drug habit cost about $2,000 a month. That would have been around $30,000 today. Mabel and Taylor were very close, exchanging gifts and visiting each other's homes often. Although she was never a serious suspect, as the last person to see Taylor alive, the police were very interested in Mabel. They interviewed her many times.
Drugs were a big problem in Hollywood. Taylor reportedly kicked a known drug supplier off one of his movie sets and was well known for being against drugs. His involvement in a commission to kick dealers out of Hollywood and keep Mabel Normand, and possibly others, drug-free may have made him a target for drug dealers or organized crime.
Edward Sands had been Taylor's cook and valet until he disappeared 7 months before Taylor's murder. He may have served with Taylor in World War I, and Taylor may have hired him because of this. What Taylor may not have known was Sands was a convicted criminal and serial deserter from the United States military. In 1921, Taylor had been away in Europe, and during this absence, Sands forged checks, stole and pawned items belonging to Taylor, and wrecked Taylor's car. After the murder, he could not be found. Police considered him the #1 suspect, and a description of Sands was given to the newspapers. An arrest warrant had been issued for the forgery and stolen items, but a warrant for the murder was never issued. He was never found.
19-year-old beauty Mary Miles Minter was head over heels in love with 49-year-old Taylor. She had made several films with him and was not shy about her infatuation. Taylor did not seem to return her affection and told Mary he was much too old for her, but she sent him love letters and continued to pursue him romantically. Born Juliette Riley in Louisiana, she began acting at the age of 5. Her mother, Charlotte Shelby, managed her career and changed Juliette's identity to that of dead relative Mary Miles Minter to increase Juliette's age.
The Shelby Minter family was dysfunctional to the extreme. Mary seems to have been a bit unstable, having once locked herself in a room with a gun the same make and caliber as the one that killed Taylor. She shot the gun randomly and laid it on the floor. When her mother and others finally broke in, she thought it was a wonderful joke.
Mary had an affair with a young director and may have become pregnant. Her mother was reported to have confronted him with a gun and threatened to kill him if he ever went near Mary again. 3 blonde hairs were found on Taylor's jacket. They were later matched to hair from Mary's hairbrush.
Charlotte Shelby was a failed actress. When her career failed, she put her 2 daughters on stage. Daughter Margaret Shelby was not successful, but little Mary Miles Minter was going to be a star, and Charlotte Shelby was going to make that happen and protect the family's meal ticket. The studio and directors did not like Charlotte. She was known to threaten anyone who got too close to Mary, with everything from hatpins to guns. She locked Mary in her room when she didn't want her going out. She handled all of Mary's money, and the two would be in and out of court for years after the Taylor murder, with Mary claiming Charlotte mismanaged or outright stole her earnings. And Charlotte believed Taylor and Mary were romantically involved. She also owned a gun the same make and caliber of the one that was used to kill Taylor. It was reported that Mary once stated that her mother killed everything she loved. Charlotte also happened to be a close friend of District Attorney at the time of Taylor's death.
The Los Angeles Police Department received over 300 written tips, confessions, helpful hints, and psychic solutions in the first 6 weeks following Taylor's murder. And the newspapers of the day got even more. They played this story for all it was worth. The murder was headline material for weeks, and if there wasn't news, they could certainly make something up. And they did.
Mabel Normand's career never recovered after Taylor's death. Newspapers across the country gleefully printing stories about her relationship with Taylor, being the co-star in many of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle's movies, and her wild lifestyle and drug use made it difficult for her to find work. In 1924, her chauffeur shot a man at a party she was attending, and the theaters pulled her movies and refused to show them.
She made a few more films, and in 1926 married Lou Cody, although they never lived together. She died of tuberculosis in 1930 when she was just 36 years old. It is said that shortly before she died, she asked, "I wonder who killed poor Bill Taylor."
Charlotte Shelby left for Europe shortly after Taylor's death. In Europe, she was beyond the reach of the police and district attorneys. She remained there for 20 years. After she returned to the U.S., she demanded the current district attorney clear her name in the case.
Mary Miles Minter made 4 more movies after Taylor died. In 1923, the studio did not renew her contract, and she retired. In 1925, she sued her mother for earnings and settled out of court. She invested in real estate and apparently did well enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life. She lived in Santa Monica, California, and at some point her mother moved in with her. She was married to Brandon O'Hildebrandt from 1957 until his death in 1965. In 1981, she was severely beaten, and over $300,000 worth of items were stolen from her home. 4 people were charged with burglary and attempted murder. She died in 1984 at 82 years old. In the few interviews she gave, she called Taylor her mate and claimed they were engaged at the time of his death.
Hollywood itself was forever changed by Taylor's murder. Coming so close to the Arbuckle trial and deaths of beloved stars due to drugs, the newspaper stories about Taylor's murder made Hollywood look like a cesspool of drug and alcohol-fueled parties. Religious and women's groups across America demanded change. Hollywood, fearing government censorship, hired William Hayes, who was the Postmaster General at the time, to head up the new Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America. It would create a set of guidelines for morally accepted movies, and the Motion Picture Production Code, called the Hays Code, listed do's and don'ts that all films were expected to follow. Moral clauses were written into contracts for actors and actresses. The movies and television rating system we see today began with the scandals of the 1920s and the unsolved murder of William Desmond Taylor.
There are some really good books, movies, and articles on Taylor's death, and many of them come to different conclusions. Writers have been certain they've cracked this case, and many of them present facts to support their differing conclusions, which is part of the problem. There's enough about these suspects, and others that have been mentioned over the years, to make any of them believable as a killer. But with a contaminated crime scene, bungled investigation, corruption, and a press that invented facts, William Desmond Taylor's killer will probably never be known. Although an actress named Patricia Palmer claimed on her deathbed in 1964 that she had killed Taylor. She had appeared in a film with Taylor in 1914 under the name Margaret Gibson. She was not even a suspect in 1922.